I want you to think about the last time you talked to a neighbor. Maybe you said, good morning. Maybe you borrowed something. Maybe you just nodded in the hallway. Now, I want you to imagine finding out years later that that person was never real. Not that they moved away. Not that they died. That they never existed at all. That the apartment they lived in has been sealed shut since 2009. And then when you go back and look at every single photo from those 3 years, the spot next to you is empty. This happened to someone on Reddit. And when they posted about it, the comments got very, very strange. Our narrator, let's call him David, moved into Harlow Court Apartments in the fall of 2019. Third floor, apartment 3F. He was 28, recently out of a long relationship, new job in the city, starting over. The building was old but decent. High ceilings, creaky elevators, the kind of place that smells like someone else is cooking by 6 p.m. He met the man from 4, be about a week in. He was just standing by the elevator, waiting like normal people do. Medium height, maybe 45, maybe older, hard to tell. Dark jacket, calm face. The kind of person you'd walk past 100 times and never remember, but somehow always recognize. He introduced himself as Mark. No last name. Just, I'm Mark, I'm up on 4. David said hi, they rode the elevator together, talked about the building, about the neighborhood, nothing weird, nothing off. Mark seemed pleasant, quiet, but warm. The kind of neighbor you're relieved to have. Over the next few months, they developed a routine. Not friendship exactly, more like familiar strangers. They'd talk in the hallway, by the mailboxes. Once in a while in the parking lot. Mark asked about David's job, remembered details, asked follow-up questions weeks later. How did that presentation go? Did you ever find a good coffee place nearby? One time, in early 2020, David's sink was leaking and he couldn't find his wrench. He knocked on 4B. Mark answered immediately, like he'd been standing right at the door. Handed over a toolbox without hesitation, smiled, said, just bring it back whenever. David returned it 2 days later. Knocked on 4B. Mark opened the door almost before David finished knocking. Thanked him. That was it. 3 years of this. Small moments, hallway conversations, the occasional wave from across the parking lot. Nothing dramatic, nothing strange. Until the summer of 2022, David was planning a small rooftop gathering, 4 or 5 people, nothing big. On a whim, he decided to invite Mark. It felt like the right thing to do. They'd been neighbors for 3 years. He went up to the 4th floor and walked down the hallway. 4A, 4B, 4C. He knew the layout. He'd been to that floor a dozen times. But when he got to where 4B should be, there was no door. There was a wall, not a new wall, not a recently installed wall, an old wall painted the same faded beige as everything else, with a slightly different texture, like drywall had been layered over something. If you looked closely, you could see the faint rectangular outline where a door frame used to be. David stood there for a long time. He thought he'd miscounted. He went back to the stairwell and started again. 4A, then wall, then 4C. There was no 4B. He went to the building manager that afternoon, a tired guy named Phil who'd worked there for over a decade. David described Mark, described the apartment number, asked what was going on. Phil looked at him for a moment without saying anything. Then he pulled out a binder, actual paper records, and flipped through it. He stopped on a page, read something, and closed it. That unit's been sealed since 2009, he said. There was an incident. David asked what kind of incident. Phil looked up. His expression wasn't scared. It was something closer to tired. Like he'd had this conversation before. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I'll tell you what I told the last person who asked. Just don't go looking into it. It doesn't help. He closed the binder. That was the end of the conversation. David went home and did the only rational thing. He started going through 3 years of photos. His phone, his laptop, his old Instagram archives, any image from that apartment building, that hallway, that parking lot. He was looking for Mark. In 3 years of living there, birthday parties on the rooftop, a Halloween thing in the lobby, dozens of casual snapshots, he couldn't find a single image where Mark was clearly visible. There were photos where David remembered Mark being nearby. He could feel the memory of it. Standing next to him while someone took a picture. But in the actual photo, the space beside him was empty. Or someone's shoulder was slightly blurred in a way that didn't match anything. Or there was just nothing. He texted 3 different neighbors asking if they remembered Mark from 4B. One said no. One said, I don't think I've ever seen anyone go in or out of that floor much. The third one, a woman named Sarah who'd lived there even longer than David, took about 20 minutes to respond. When she did, she said, I know who you mean. I've been trying to forget about him. She didn't elaborate. She stopped responding after that. David sat with this for about a week. Then he did what any reasonable person in 2022 would do. He posted on Reddit. He posted in Our Paranormal. Title, My Neighbor of 3 Years Doesn't Exist, and his apartment has been sealed since 2009. I don't know what to do. He expected skepticism. He expected people to tell him he was confused, misremembering, maybe dealing with some kind of mental health thing. The first few comments were exactly that. But then, around comment 40 or 50, something shifted. A user named throwaway 847,261 wrote, "This is going to sound insane, but I had almost the exact same experience in my building in Portland. Guy named Thomas, always in the hallway, never actually came or went. I found out 2 years in that the unit he supposedly lived in had been a storage room for 15 years. I never talk about this." People started asking follow-up questions. Then another user replied, NMLurker09, "Mine was in Albuquerque. Different name, same description. Medium height, older, dark jacket, calm, always near the elevator. Never saw him enter or leave his door. I thought I was the only one." Then another, and another. Within 24 hours, there were over 60 people describing the same basic experience. Different cities, different buildings, different names. But the same details kept surfacing over and over. Always a man, middle-aged, unremarkable appearance, always calm, friendly, too attentive, remembered small details about your life, always near transitional spaces, hallways, elevators, parking lots, stairwells, never seen entering or exiting an apartment. The apartment itself either didn't exist, was sealed, or had been vacant for years. No photos, or photos where the space beside you is somehow empty. One commenter, a user who claimed to be a building manager, wrote, "We have protocols for certain units. Things we're told not to discuss with residents. I can't say more than that. But you're not the first person to report this, and you won't be the last. My advice, don't try to make contact again. If it shows up again, don't engage, just walk." The comment was deleted 40 minutes later. The thread eventually got locked by the moderators, not for rule breaking, but because in the Modi note, it was generating reports from multiple users claiming real-world distress related to this post. Before it was locked, it had been shared over 4,000 times. 3 days after the thread was locked, David received a private message. The account that sent it had been created that same day. No posts, no history. Just a new account made hours before the message was sent. The message contained 4 words, "You should have knocked." David screenshotted it and tried to reply. The account was already gone. Deleted or just vanished within the same hour. He still lives in the building. He still walks past the 4th floor sometimes. The elevator opens there by accident, or he takes the stairs and cuts through. He says the hallway on 4 feels different from the others. Quieter somehow, even when there's noise from other units, like the air there is waiting. He hasn't seen Mark again, but he told one final thing in his post, something he buried in an edit at the bottom, almost like he didn't want people to notice it. "The toolbox, the one Mark lent me back in 2020. I still have it. I never thought about it again until now. It's real. It's sitting in my closet. I can touch it. It has weight. I don't know what that means. I don't think I want to know." And that's where the story ends, not with an answer, not with a resolution, just a toolbox in a closet. From a man who was never there. If you've had something like this happen, if you've had a neighbor, a coworker, a regular at your coffee shop, someone who felt completely real, completely there, and then one day the reality just didn't match, I want to hear about it in the comments. Because if this thread taught us anything, it's that David wasn't the only one. And maybe neither are you. Like and subscribe if this kept you up. I'll see you in the next one.